Hey, it's Sandra. Welcome to another episode of Asexualise, my asexual life. It's a place to be for education about asexuality. So if that sounds like something you'd like to hear about, please subscribe and hit the bell icon right now. So in today's episode, we're discussing what should you do if you don't fit into a specific category, identity, or sub-identity of asexuality. Right, so asexuality is basically two categories: pure asexuals and grey asexuals. Then you have identities within those categories, such as heteromantic, panromantic, and you have lots of sub-identities as well. You have combinations of identities and all sorts of things. So in the grey end of the asexual spectrum, you can get phrasexual, you can get demisexual, you can get cupiosexual, but you can also have a mix of non-romantic and romantic asexuals. You could be non-romantic but demisexual, and so non-romantic, in other words, aromantic, those who lack romantic attraction but still be demisexual, so have sexual attraction only when a deep emotional bond has been formed, for example. So the pure asexuals are those who don't experience any sexual attraction whatsoever, and the grey asexuals are the people who experience sexual attraction, but only under limited, rare, specific circumstances, or they experience it but not enough to want to act on it. But there's also another lot of grey asexuals who don't fit quite into the asexual category, and they don't quite fit into the sexual category. So they're not pure asexual in the sense of they've got these sexual grey areas. So with there being so many identities and sub-identities, and there are new terms popping up on asexual websites, right, that are just created, including recently. Like, what do you do if you don't fit into any specific identity? First of all, make sure that you believe you are asexual and on the asexual spectrum, right? So you need to research asexuality, find out what it is, find out the myths and stereotypes of asexuality. I've done videos about these things, and find out if you believe you fit someone where on the asexual spectrum. So ask yourself questions like, when I think about having sex, how does it make me feel? Do I feel disgusted? Do I feel repulsed? Do I feel indifferent? Do I feel I'd rather not bother with it? Do I have no inclination to do it? Do I just feel like it's not who I am? This is not for me, all these type of things. If you answered yes, then you likely would be somewhere on the asexual spectrum if you didn't experience sexual attraction particularly. So asexuality is usually defined by a lack of sexual attraction, but can also be defined by a lack of interest in sexual activities. But the main way it's defined is a lack of sexual attraction. The full definition, depending on where you look, is a lack of sexual attraction and or little to no interest in sexual activities. So if you are a person that has little or no interest in sexual activities and you don't feel sexual attraction towards someone, so you don't look at someone and think, oh, I'd like to have sex with them, then you're highly likely to be asexual. If you look back at your life and you consider if you are asexual or not, looking back at your life, can you see throughout your childhood, your teen years, going into adulthood, like, how was your thinking and behavior towards the gender or people that you're usually attracted to? So, for example, I'm attracted to guys, and I had my first heterosexual relationship at just 6 years old. And this guy was the same age as me, and he and me were doing lots of passionate kissing at 6 years old, and he wanted to do sexual exploration stuff, and I felt completely invaded, and I hated that whole thing. I didn't wanna do it, but I felt pressurized into it even at age 6. He was the same age as me, and, I had no interest in the sexual stuff. I was only doing it because I lacked self-love, yeah, even at 6 years old, and it was because I wanted a boyfriend at that time, and I associated a boyfriend with love, and as we know as adults, even if you have a boyfriend, it doesn't necessarily mean to say that boyfriend loves you, right? And not necessarily in a healthy way. But when you're 6, you don't really understand that stuff. But I really love kissing even at 6, and it excited me, and I really, really enjoyed it, right? Most asexuals in my knowledge and experience are not that into kissing. So you might have gone through your teens and maybe you weren't really interested in relationships. You certainly weren't interested in sex, or you had little interest in it. You didn't understand what all the fuss was about with sex. You couldn't get your head around it. These are all strong signs that you're likely to be asexual if you still feel the same way now. And when I was like in my teens, like 15, for example, there was a guy that I was, attracted to in school, and all I would think about is like kissing and cuddling him and stuff like that. So I'm trying to remember the dates because I actually ended up having a boyfriend when I was 15, but it wasn't the time I had a boyfriend. So I don't know actually when it was, but I think I was 15. It was in my teens anyway. And I remember there was this guy at school, and I really liked him aesthetically. I was attracted to him, but all I was doing is going near where I thought he lived. I didn't exactly know where he lived, but I knew the area he lived in. And I used to like go for a walk. This was near where my grandma used to live. So I wasn't going completely out of my way, but it wasn't exactly where she lived. It was like the one off one of the roads that led up to the road that she was in. And so in a roundabout way. So I used to head off near the shop just in case I bumped into him. And I used to think about his smile and kiss it. Wow, I think he smiled. I used to think about his face and he wearing his short dark hair. And I used to think, oh, I'd like to kiss him and cuddle him. I'd like to see him. And I used to kind of like think using my imagination about what it like to be like to be with him, kissing, cuddling, holding hands. I wasn't at all interested in sex, and I didn't think about it at all. And when I did have a boyfriend at 15 years old, this guy showed me a condom in his drawer, and I just said it's nice, thinking it was a nice object for him, not thinking that he wanted sex with me because I didn't think about sex at 15 years old. It never entered my head. I never considered it. I never thought about it. It wasn't something that I was interested in. I remember when I was 14 and in a relationship. I was in a lot of relationships in my teens, and not all at once, but quite in quite succession, And so anyway, I remembered when I was 14 and I had a boyfriend, and I found like these porn magazine stuff under his bed, and I was just so disgusted. And I didn't like the fact that I was in a relationship with a guy who was like looking at these magazines. And when I was like 15, like I said, I never thought about having sex. It didn't even enter my head. It didn't even enter my brain at all. I was completely switched off to it. And yes, that guy, when I was 15, tried to have sex with me against my will, I might add. I was 15 and he was 18, and that was underage. Luckily, I physically stopped him, and that was very, very difficult. Um, but I'm an asexual who has had sex in the past. So whilst I say that a typical sign of being asexual when you're younger is not being interested in sex, not caring about it, not being bothered about it. I really was that way. Up to 15, I didn't even think about it at all. Like, apart from obviously, I saw like my then ex when he was 14, like looking at magazines, Porkies, I think it used to be called, and it was just to do with like it had like pornographic stuff on it. I remember I just thought it was a disgusting thing, and the stuff that he was watching on TV and movies and so I just thought it was horrendous. So anyway, I was not interested in sex. I was just interested in kissing, cuddling, romance, and feeling love and all that type of thing. So if that sounds like you when you were a teenager and you still resonate with that today, then it's highly likely you're asexual or on the asexual spectrum. So let's talk about the fact that some asexuals do have sex or have had sex. Like, can you still be asexual if you've had sex, or if you think about having sex, if you consider it in a relationship, or if you've had it in the past? Like, can you be asexual? There's a lot of myths and stereotypes, and people believe if you're asexual, you never have sex. And pure asexuals, like I've said, don't experience any sexual attraction whatsoever. So a lot of those wouldn't have sex, right? It's more the grey asexuals that would. Having said this, you'll often find that a number of pure asexuals, those that find out later in life that asexual did have sex when they were younger and trying relationships out because they didn't realize there was an option not to have sex. They thought, as I did, that when you're in a relationship, it's expected of you to have sex, and that's what you have to do in a normal relationship to maintain and sustain it. You need to have sex. That's part of what comes with a relationship, right? This is what we're taught, this is what we're conditioned. So you can't blame an asexual person for having sex if that's what they thought they were supposed to do, if blame's even the right word, right? And you have to understand that some asexuals have had sex in the past because they felt they had to. They didn't know any different. They didn't know asexuality existed. And then they just come to realize at a certain point in their life that they really don't want it. They're not interested in it and they don't want to do it again. And some people believe that's just because they've had bad sex, right? So asexuality is not the same as having bad sex. Asexuality is not the same as having a traumatic sexual experience and not wanting sex. Like I had that incident at 15, but I had sex after that, later in relationships, right? So that didn't stop me having sex. I just put that down to a bad incident in my life and moved on pretty much with it, and that was it. I don't think the guy's good. He got the next girl he saw, he got pregnant. I was just glad it wasn't me, It wasn't nice at the time. It's pretty horrendous time actually in the moment, but I'm fine with that. I came to terms with it. It's actually, although I've had a lot of different traumas in my life, that's one of the least amount of trauma. It's the least impactful in my life, if you know what I mean. And I don't want to say that to minimize anyone else's feelings about theirs if they've gone through a similar experience. I don't want to do that. I've actually had two lots of that type of thing. One was the 15 when a guy tried it on, and another was an ex-boyfriend who just pounced on me. That's not actually why I split up with him though. I split up with him because he wouldn't hold my hand in public and kiss me, and he just wanted to have me in secret, even though it wasn't good what he did, right? But again, I had a sexual relationship after that. I actually had a sexual relationship with my last long-term ex, and that relationship ended in 2011. And after that, I could just not bring myself to have sex ever again. I knew that it didn't matter how aroused I felt in my body, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't bring myself to do it. By 2013, there was a Bangladesh guy, and he was so hot and good looking, really aesthetically good looking. And I had huge aesthetic attraction for him. I just couldn't bring myself to have sex with him. I tried to do other stuff just to please him, and I shouldn't have really done that. I know differently now. But back then I didn't know, and I didn't discover I was asexual until 2014. And so some people who are asexual have had sex because they don't realize that there might be. I was okay about having sex at the time. Not the ones that I didn't consent to, but I was all right having sex with the proper consensual ex-boyfriends. And that's important to know, and I was okay, but now I'm sex repulsed. But I say I was okay, but with my last long-term ex, I would rather have stayed doing the washing up, and I hate washing up. So he used to try and instigate sex while I was doing the washing up, listening to my headphones. And I just wanted to stay doing the washing up because I didn't like sex. I wasn't into sex. I was just into kissing and touching, but I wasn't really interested in it. I didn't like sex in the sense that I wasn't bothered about it, but the sex with him was good because he was good at doing that. But what I'm trying to say is I wasn't repulsed with sex then. I was okay about having sex, but I really compared to the washing up, I really preferred the washing up. I really didn't like doing that compared to the washing up because it was better because I wasn't interested in it. I just would rather have done other things, right? So if I had a choice between washing up that I hate or doing that, I prefer to do the washing up. That's what I'm trying to say. But I wasn't repulsed by it then. I was okay doing that. And it's not I actually felt everything. So some asexuals, they're very kind of feel very distant from the sex act if they do it. They feel like disassociated from it because it's not what they really want. And so they feel like they're having this experience that someone else is going through and it's not really them. And I think that's because they actually don't want to do it. And if they don't want to do it, one of the ways you can, one of the ways that people sometimes deal with a traumatic experience or something they don't like, something they don't want to happen to them, is they distance themselves emotionally and mentally from the thing that's happening to them in order for them to be able to cope with it. It's a coping mechanism. This isn't healthy. This is why sexual relationships are not healthy for those who don't want, don't like, don't need them, and don't get the urge for them. It's actually very damaging for those people. So if you relate to the type of things I'm saying, like you maybe you felt romance, maybe you didn't, because there's a lot of asexuals that are non-romantic. Maybe you just had no interest in sex whatsoever or anything, or maybe you had sex because you felt you had to, or maybe you are an asexual person currently, but you do have sex. So how does that work? Right. So a lack of sexual attraction is not a lack of sexual action necessarily, right? So a lot of people who don't experience sexual attraction, they don't want to do sexual acts or have sex itself because they have no attraction there. So therefore the sex doesn't appeal to them. It can put them off if they're not attracted to the person sexually. And they just feel like they can feel like the person is spoilt by having sex with them. That is kind of something that asexuals feel. It's like, I'll spoil you, or the whole relationship will be spoilt by having sex, because they see it as some asexuals see it as animalistic, primal, like not loving and kind and caring. And people will tell you that making love is different to having sex. And yes, in terms of the experience and feelings, maybe that's true, because when you make love, it's normally a more sensual experience where it's coming from a more loving place rather than an animalistic place. But at the end of the day, you're still having sex, right? So if an asexual doesn't have sex, well, they have sex or make love and have sexual intercourse. If they don't like intercourse, if they don't like sexual intercourse, they don't like either of them. If they really don't like sex, right, at all. But some asexuals, they'll have sex because they're not repulsed by the act. And although they don't like have sexual attraction, go around looking at people, think, oh, I want sex with that person, I got the urge to have sex with that person, that they might be something like, for example, a demisexual who has to have a deep emotional bond before they can experience sexual attraction. And this is different to someone who just wishes to have an emotional connection before they have sex. And a demisexual relies on a deep emotional connection and bond in order to experience sexual attraction. Otherwise, they can't experience it at all. And so this means they might only experience sexual attraction with a handful of people, or maybe just one person if they get into a serious committed relationship and it's just that one they have that deep emotional connection with. And then a demisexual, because they can only experience sexual attraction in those circumstances, may very well want sex and experience sexual attraction like the rest of the majority population, right? But up until that time, they don't experience it at all. But you can get some people in the grey end of the asexual spectrum who are actually sex repulsed and don't like sex, or really prefer not to have it, or only have it occasionally. But there's also some asexuals that are like neutral about sex. And while they don't experience necessary sexual attraction, or they experience it infrequently, or they experience it in limited circumstances, they might partake in sex because they want to feel physically close to their partner. And they don't get the need, urge, and want necessarily for sex, but they want to have the ultimate physically close, intertwined bodies with each other that they can possibly get. That's the only elegant way I can put it, really. So obviously you can be intertwined with clothes on, bodies intertwined with clothes on. I can do that. I'm an asexual person who is repulsed by sex, but I like physical contact with clothes on. So I could happily be with the right guy in a serious commitment relationship and be passionately kissing him and have our sexual parts near each other or face to face with each other with clothes on. I can do stuff like that. But obviously you have to be careful what happens with that. So yeah, I know you. It's better to just like be very careful when you're doing stuff like that, right? I don't want things leaking through clothing, but I'm saying that I can be very physically close, bodies intertwined with the guy with clothes on, right? But some asexuals, that for me is like my ultimate closeness usually that I get to a guy, right? But I'm an asexual who has had sex in the past. I have been naked with my ex, like long-term ex, and I have not the ex this year, the last long-term ex in 2011. And I have been naked before and I have had sex before. And like the only thing I can say about sex, like the positive of it, if I'm being like objectional, is like if the person's in you and you really love that person and you don't mind the person being in you, then it can feel like you're really close to that person. And as an asexual person, it's like it's not the sex you are interested in, it's being as physically close as possible with that person and connecting with your bodies in that way, right? So I don't do this anymore, but I do remember what the experience was like. And although I said that I didn't really like sex in the past, like I did have it and I wasn't repulsed by it back then. And I do remember times when I was thinking I'm not really interested in sex, but I like the closeness of I was in a long-term relationship. So at that point, I liked the closeness of the guy, I was having sex with because I was in a long term. We were together for 8.5 years in total. We were like together for a year and a half, split up, and then got back for 7 years. So it was a long-term relationship. It wasn't anything casual. And he was actually quite thin, and I liked that because our bodies went really well together. And like, although I wasn't bothered about sex in terms of I'd rather have done the washing up, and I hate washing up, I wasn't repulsed by sex back then. And I felt everything, and it was good what he did. He was gentle, kind, and if I ever wanted to stop, he would stop. But I just like loved the kissing, and at that point, I liked being touched at that point as well in a naked scenario, which I've not done for years. And if I analysed the way I felt, even though I wasn't thinking I want sex or like it or need it, when I say like it, I wasn't like thinking, oh, it's great, I want to have it. I wasn't disliking it. I was kind of like thinking it was, I was thinking with him, it's nice experience and it was good sex in the terms of like it was a good experience. I could stop whenever I wanted, but I'd rather not do it. Because it was just like I'd rather be doing other stuff, and I really wasn't into that like he was. But I liked the closeness of it. But I would rather have just done the kissing and cuddling. But there was the odd occasion where I thought, oh, it's nice in terms of like how close I am to this guy I love right now. Like I can't get any closer to him. And so, I do remember having that experience. I think it's important to be honest about that because, I have got to finish writing my Asexual Guide to Sex book, and I'm very objectional a lot more in that book, so I remember, like, I didn't hate it then. I just felt that, I'd rather be doing other things. And I think the reason why I liked the sexual experience with him wasn't because I liked the sex itself, but I wasn't hating that either with him. It was because he was nicer to me then, because it wasn't a good relationship for me in other ways. he was not nice to me, but when he was doing sexual stuff, he was the opposite. He was really kind and caring and thoughtful. He wasn't like that the rest of the time. So I think the times I had sex with him, I liked those times because of how nice he was to me, not because of the sex itself, if you know what I mean. So it wasn't like I disliked it. But you know what I mean? It's like I dislike the fact that he bought me an outfit once, a Santa outfit, and that was to have sex with me in it. I thought I was a bit like sleazy, but he specifically bought it so he could have sex with me in it. And I didn't realise back then that I experienced high levels of arousal, but I didn't actually experience zero sexual attraction. I had like zero sexual attraction because I didn't look at him and think, oh, I want sex with you. But occasionally I did instigate it because it was about being in control, about me taking control of the situation rather than just him doing it all the time, if you know what I mean. It only happened a handful of times, I think, in the whole time I was with him. So if an asexual is having sex, they might not be fully into it like the sexual person is, but they might be okay about it, they might be neutral about it. There are some asexuals on the grey end of the asexual spectrum who do say they enjoy sex. Now, this can be very confusing because of the definition of asexuality is little to no interest in sexual activities, which is a definition of asexuality. But if you take asexuality as a lack of sexual attraction, then that doesn't necessarily equate to a lack of sexual action. And so it depends what definition someone goes by as to whether that person's asexual or not. But an asexual person is someone who doesn't experience any sexual attraction, and then you've got grey asexual. But as asexuality is also classed as a spectrum of identity, someone who identifies as asexual, as in a pure asexual, doesn't experience any sexual attraction. A grey asexual can experience sexual attraction, but only usually does it under a limited, rare, or infrequent circumstances, where it experiences sexual attraction but not enough to want to act on it. But you can get grey asexuals that don't fit in to pure asexual, but they're not fully into that or fully into the grey asexual part, as in either of those two definitions, but they're still classed as grey asexuals because they don't fit into the normal sexual spectrum. So if you're not sure where you fit on the asexual spectrum, but you feel you do belong to it somewhere, it's better to identify on the grey asexual or grey sexual, as it's otherwise known, end of the asexual spectrum if you think you identify in some way with asexual. Because unless you don't experience any sexual attraction whatsoever to anyone of any gender, then you can't really call yourself a pure asexual. Where it gets confusing, where asexuality gets confusing, is everyone who belongs to the asexual spectrum usually calls themselves asexual. But the word asexual is absence of sexual attraction, whereas grey asexual is a grey area, right? So asexual, pure asexual is the same thing, really, because a pure asexual just calls themselves asexual. But anyone who's on the spectrum of asexuality identities can also call themselves asexual because they belong to the asexuality spectrum of identities. So they might not call themselves a grey asexual, they might call themselves asexual, but they're not asexual in the sense of being a pure asexual who doesn't experience any sexual attraction. So this is where it gets very confusing. So if you are experiencing that innate need, that desire or want for sex, you wouldn't be asexual if you're experiencing that in the usual frequent manner, which obviously can be subjective. So on average, as far as I know, heterosexuals like to have sex 3 times a week. Sometimes they like it a lot more than that, but That's what the average heterosexual male, as far as I know, likes, right? And they have a high interest in sexual activities, high interest in having sex, and sex is very important to them. So if you are the type of person who sex is very important to, and you like sex a number of times a week, you would likely not be asexual. However, if that's not the norm for you, and you may only experience that with 1 or 2 people so far in your life, then you might still be on the grey end of the asexual spectrum. Because, like I said, grey asexuals only experience sexual attraction under limited, rare, or specific circumstances. Or they experience it, but not enough to want to act on it usually. These are the main 2 categories of grey asexuals. So you have to ask yourself honestly, like, how much do I want sex? Do I think about sex? What's my attitude towards sex? And what's my innate feeling? Innate is like something inbuilt within you. If your innate feeling is, I got that need, urge, I want for partner sexual intercourse, and I look at different people in the world and think, I want sex with that person. What would it be like to have sex with that person? Really good to have sex with that person. All this lot. You're unlikely to be asexual, right? If you just experience the usual sexual attraction and want to get into a relationship, have sex 3 times a week or more, enjoy like sexual acts, enjoy full sexual intercourse and everything like that, you're likely not going to be on the asexual spectrum, right? We also have to ask ourselves and be honest about the questions about what else might be our reason for not wanting sex. Every reason is valid, but in order to assess where you are on the asexual spectrum, or if you're on the asexual spectrum at all or not, you need to be asking yourself all these types of questions, right? Like, what is your innate need feeling about sex, but also what is your mindset about sex? And we can also look and explore other aspects of our life to see if there's any other reasons why we might not want or like sex, which aren't actually asexual. So, for example, if you have a disability and that disability prevents you from having sex, that's not asexuality, right? It's not the same as being asexual. However, it does not mean to say that some asexuals don't have disabilities, because they do. So you have to be careful when you consider whether you're asexual or not if you've got a disability. But if you, for example, have some disability that stops you having sex, but you really would like to have it, and maybe it frustrates you, then you're not asexual. Like, asexuality is when you don't get that innate need, desire, or want for partner sexual intercourse because you don't experience sexual attraction, right? So if you get that usual desire, need, and urge, it's a different mindset. Someone who's really wanting sex and not asexual is really focused on having it. They're focused on when they can get sex next, how often they're going to have it. They're making it part of their life. It's really important to them. They see it as a necessity, something they can't live without, and they need in a relationship. It's a deal breaker for them, right? If you're feeling like that, you're not asexual, right? And even if you've got a disability that prevents you from having sex, but you feel like that, that's not asexuality. We have to understand there's loads of different people in the world with different backgrounds and circumstances that might mean they don't want sex. But not wanting sex because, or can't have sex because of disability or some other reason. For example, maybe your medication stops you from having sex, right? And you were fine, you had a great big sex drive, you really wanted sex until you had a medication. So it's a medication that's controlling your body and hormones and mind, and probably suppressing hormones to make you, or make you not want sex anymore. If you are not wanting sex due to a medical condition and where you're having medicine for it and you were fine before that, maybe it's depression or something like that, then you're not asexual, right? You can't confuse these things. It's very difficult because in the asexual community at large, there are people who are defining asexuals. For example, there's a type of asexual that is being defined, and it's for people who don't experience sexual attraction because of PTSD and trauma they've been through. But that's not actually asexuality, right? Asexuality is not the same as having PTSD or sexual trauma. Of course, those things could cause you not to want sex or need it or like it, but it's not the same as a sexual orientation. And the fact that the asexual community at large are popping up with different definitions of asexuality. So, I'm not here to invalidate anyone. If people want to give themselves some definitions, then I'm not going to stop them, right? It's up to you how you define yourself in life and whatever you're comfortable with. But I want you to know whether you're on the asexual spectrum or you're not on the asexual spectrum and you just don't like sex or you can't have it for whatever reason, you're still valid. If people who experience trauma in their life and they have PTSD and it stops them having sex, the reason they're coming to the asexual community is because it seems like it's the only way they feel accepted as they are. Right? So that's a societal problem. It's society who's pushing people to think that that they're not valid or valued if they don't want sex or can't have it for whatever reason. But trauma is not the same as having sex. Like, what I'm trying to say is not having sex because you're traumatized. Those are the words I was trying to think of. I said it the wrong way around, I think. Not having sex due to trauma is not the same as being asexual. The difficulty lies when those people who have had trauma don't have any interest in sex anymore. So, asexuality being, if you take asexuality definition as little to no interest in sexual activities, this is where it's hard because people who may have a medical condition, disability, or ill health, or they're taking medication, they might have little to no interest in sexual activities. But that actually doesn't make them asexual because asexuality is based on a lack of sexual attraction. And sexual attraction is an innate need, desire, urge, or want for partner sexual intercourse. But it isn't the same as experiencing some trauma that's stopping you having sex. And it isn't the same as having body dysmorphia either. So I saw there's a new term for asexuals who have like body dysmorphia. And so it's, it can stop people, you know, body dysmorphia can stop them having sexual acts done to them because they've got body dysmorphia. That's not asexuality. You can be any sexuality and have body dysmorphia and not want sex. That's not the same as asexuality. I actually dated a guy, a heterosexual guy, who had body dysmorphia. Right? He still loved having sex, but he wasn't really into kissing. And he was ashamed of his body. He told me that, really. He didn't like his body because he had body dysmorphia. But body dysmorphia is not the same as being asexual. If someone has got a psychological condition that prevents them having sex, whether that's body dysmorphia, it's they just don't like their body, they've got something that happened to them that made them not want to have sex, some traumatic experience, all these things aren't the same as being asexual. But it seems that these things are starting to filter into the asexual community and be given asexual definitions. But it's not the same as being a sexual orientation of asexuality. But like I said, if you go by the definition that asexuality is little to no interest in sexual activities, and these people who have got disabilities or medical conditions or they're on medication that stops them being interested in sex, then they could relate to that definition. and therefore start thinking they're asexual, right? So I think there's difficulties going on in the asexual community at large when just anyone is just deciding to create new terms of asexuality and new sub-identities. Like, some people think this is a great idea because there's people that feel validated by it, people that feel like included in it, people that feel like they found someone who understands them, which is all positives. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what sexuality someone is, everyone's valid in life, regardless of your sexual orientation or whether you like sex or don't like sex or anything. Everyone's valid in life, and I want you to know that. So if you're struggling to find out where you fit on the asexual spectrum, you find you don't fit exactly into it, no, you are still valuable as a person. Even if you don't fit into a specific tight little neat asexual box, you are still a valid individual. You're still worthy of being in life. You're still worthy of being here. You are still a valuable member of society. You're still worthy. Your value doesn't diminish by the sex you are or are not having. It doesn't diminish whether you like sex or not. It doesn't diminish whether you can have sex or not. You're still valid. And I think it's disgusting that society thinks anyone who doesn't want, like, or need sex for whatever reason or doesn't have sex is not valuable in a relationship, because that's just a load of rubbish. Right? So you should know that if you don't fit into any definition of asexuality, one is obviously you've got to explore the areas I've mentioned and see whether you do fit in there or not. And then, you have to reflect on your own history and background and everything, your reasons why you might have sex if you do have it, and stuff like this. And obviously, it depends whether you go by the definition of lacking sexual attraction or by the definition of little to no interest in sexual activities, which is why it's so confusing as to who is asexual and who isn't, really. Because you could have someone that lacks sexual attraction, but yet they're still partaking in sex and sexual activities. Because a lack of attraction doesn't mean a lack of action. But if you're saying you can only be asexual if you have little to no interest in sexual activities, that means all the asexuals that are having sex for whatever reason, for example, they might want to feel physically close to a partner, they might be okay about having sex in the relationship, it might not bother them one way or the other because they're not repulsed by it. It just means you've invalidated all those people and they just don't exist, right? So, and you could say, well, someone who has or takes part in sexual activities belongs to the grey asexual spectrum, grey sexual spectrum, same thing. Therefore, they're not asexual, and you could argue that. But if you understand the asexual spectrum, then grey sexuality is part of the spectrum of identities of asexuality. So most people still class themselves as asexual, but there's some people who would fall under grey asexual that don't class themselves as grey asexual. They class themselves as on the sexual spectrum. For example, phrasexual. A phrasexual is someone who only experiences sexual attraction before a deep emotional bond has been formed. They're the opposite of demisexual. So as soon as they start to experience an emotional bond with a person, they start to feel close to a person, they lose all sexual attraction. So a lot of the time for phrasexuals, they want casual relationships. They want to just hook up. And so some of them don't believe it's fair to identify as asexual because they have a lot of interest in sex and sexual activities. And they don't believe they belong at all to the asexuality spectrum. And they don't identify as asexuals for that reason. So it can be very confusing, but you have to remember, even if you don't fall into a specific identity or sub-identity or category of asexuality, if you think you belong somewhere on the asexual spectrum, but you have grey areas, you would identify as grey asexual, not a pure asexual, right? But you have to be honest with yourself. If you have got medication and that's what stops you having sex, then you are on medication that stops you having sex. Doesn't make you asexual. Because if you came off that medication, then you probably go back to having the sexual urges and feelings. It's a medication that's numbing whatever it is that usually causes sexual attraction, which is usually hormones. It's doing something with them. It's, stopping them from functioning the usual way. I have known people who have disabilities. They come to the asexual community, but it's just a disability, unfortunately, is stopping them having sex. That isn't the same as being asexual. So we have to understand these things and know the differences. And if someone has had sexual trauma, then they should be looking to get some therapy for it. I can understand where it might prevent someone, excuse me, having sex if they've had sexual trauma. It's understandable, right? And society should just accept these things. Whatever someone's reason for not having sex is, they don't want sex, that's it. It should be accepted. Excuse me. So it's up to you to decide whether you identify as asexual or not, and the reasons behind that, right? If you really don't think you fit onto the sexual spectrum because you just don't feel or think or desire sex in the usual way, you don't think about it like your friends do or relatives do, maybe you've got aunts and uncles going on at you like, when are you going to get married, when are you going to have kids? Maybe you're asexual, because a lot of asexuals, well, not all, a lot of the time they're not interested in having children as well, because that requires sex, and they're not in a rush to get into a relationship, and don't necessarily want the conventional marriage and kids, sex, marriage and kids lifestyle, because they think differently. Like, even if an asexual has sex, a lot of asexuals that have sex would be like, I can take it or leave it, and I'm doing this as a way to feel close to the person because they enjoy it and we're enjoying it as an activity to do together. And you know what I mean? And they just don't mind doing that, even though they don't experience a sexual attraction. And maybe they can enjoy sex because they get aroused and they like the arousal experience and they like the feeling it gives their body. And they like being close to their partner and they feel good about doing that because it feels nice that they can do that with them and have that shared experience together. But then when they've done that, they don't go around thinking, oh, I want sex. Do you know what I mean? So, because a lot of asexuals don't usually instigate sex. They usually it would be the sexual partner that would do that if they want sex, for example. So I think you have to consider all these things. Obviously, if they're on the grey asexual part of the asexual spectrum, and they do experience sexual attraction only under limited rel specific circumstances, so maybe it's just one person they feel sexual attraction towards, then they might experience the usual sexual attraction just under that circumstance, therefore want the sex. So it depends whether they're a pure asexual or grey asexual. But say you just find that you have different parts of the asexual spectrum identities within you, but you feel like you're not a whole of anything, that is still okay. You're still valid. That may make life a bit more difficult for you. That may make life seem just really strange for you, but know that you're still okay and you're valid. If you feel you don't fit on the sexual spectrums, because you don't go around looking at people thinking, oh, I want sex with this person, really want sex with that person, you have a real disinterest in sex in general, maybe you've been like that for a long time, and you're just like, I just don't fit into this heterosexual world. I just look at it and I think, what is everyone going on about porn and sex? And oh my God. I mean, some asexuals do watch porn. They usually watch it to get aroused, to masturbate and stuff like that if they watch it. Some watch it for interest or intrigue. But, there's many asexuals that are also not interested or want to be left out of that type of thing, So please do think about all these different types of asexuals, but understand that sometimes you just don't fit into a tight asexual box. Like, I have so many parts to my personality and the way I think and the way I feel that I don't feel I fit into any tidy, neat little asexual box on its own. I identify as a heteromantic asexual, so I'm attracted to guys romantically. But I have loads of attractions, just not sexual. I have aesthetic and sensual attraction, the guy's upper body. I have emotional attraction, creative attraction, clothes attraction, spiritual attraction, intelligence attraction. So many different attractions going on, right? That I can separate for different people, how I feel about them. Obviously, I don't have this for all the guys. And I get attracted mostly to Indian guys more than any other type of guy. And also Middle Eastern, Bangladesh, Pakistani as well. A lot of foreign guys. Right? I love coloured skin. It's very beautiful to me. So, I don't get that attracted to British guys these days. It doesn't mean to say I can't, because I can. It's possible, but I just don't get that attracted, especially instantly, to that many British guys. Or if I do get attracted to them, it's not enough to want to act on it. So I'm laughing because it's like I've got bits in me of different definitions of asexuality people and identities, if you like. So usually the grey sexuals experience sexual attraction but not enough to want to act on it. That's some types of grey sexuals. Others just experience it limited, rare, or infrequent circumstances or specific circumstances. So with me, I can be attracted to British guys, but not enough to want to act on that attraction. That isn't a specific asexual thing. So with asexuality, there's two identities, if you like, two types of identities that would talk about experiencing something but not enough to want to act on it. One is a demi-romantic that experience romantic attraction. Sorry, not demi-romantic, grey romantic. A grey romantic, so a demi-romantic is the equivalent of a demisexual, but in a romantic sense. So demi-romantic is someone who only experiences romantic attraction when a deep emotional bond has been formed, like a demisexual only experiences sexual attraction when a deep emotional bond has been formed, right? But a grey romantic is someone who experiences romantic attraction, but only under limited, rare, or specific circumstances will they experience it, but not enough to want to act on it. And a grey sexual is someone who experiences sexual attraction only under limited, rare, or specific circumstances, or experience it, but not enough to want to act on it. So the not enough to want to act on it is in both those instances. Demi-romantic with the not enough to want to act on it in terms of experiencing the romantic attraction, and demisexual, grey asexual, which demisexual falls under, is they experience sexual attraction but not enough to want to act on it. So you've got romantic attraction but not enough to want to act on it, and grey sexual experiences sexual attraction but not enough to want to act on it. Those are two types of definitions of grey romantic and grey asexual. Grey romantic comes under aromantic. Those are like lack romantic attraction. So it's grey romantic is part of the aromantic spectrum, but of identities. But pure aromantic is aromantic, and then you've got grey romantic, which is also grey romantic is someone who experiences romantic attraction but only under limited, rare, specific circumstances. They experience it but not enough to want to act on it. But grey romantic is also what demi-romantic falls under and coupe romantic falls under. And you're aromantic and grey romantic. So it gets a bit confusing. So grey romantic covers a demi-romantic who only experiences romantic attraction when a deep emotional bond has been formed. Because a grey romantic can experience romantic attraction but not enough to want to act on it. Or they can experience romantic attraction but only under limited, rare, or specific circumstances. So that's the romantic, grey romantic and grey asexual, or grey sexual as it's otherwise known. I hope you understand that. So when I experience attraction for British guys, which this isn't anything directly to do with asexuality whatsoever, but it's just me personally. With British guys these days, I can only experience with British guys, I guess I feel grey romantic towards them, right? But I'd identify as heteromantic, hyper romantic. So I'm attracted romantically to the opposite gender, but I'm hyper romantic, which means I'm excessively romantic. But that is usually with myself or foreign guys. In terms of British guys, I'm more like grey romantic because I can experience romantic attraction towards British guys, but it's only either under limited rare specific circumstances that I experience enough of romantic attraction to be full romance and want a relationship with a British guy, or I experience it, but not enough to want to act on it. So you could say I'm like a grey romantic, specifically with British guys, but the rest of the time, overall, I'm a heteromantic, hyperromantic, which is how I identify. I'm excessively romantic with myself. I think a gnome looks romantic in a garden, for example. I take myself out on dates. I love candlelight, I love roses. I love romantic things, right? So, but I have a nuance of having this more grey romantic feeling towards British guys. So that's how I can relate to people on the aromantic spectrum who are grey romantic, even though I don't identify as a grey romantic because I have that element within me. So sometimes when we don't fit into a tight little neat asexual box, it actually helps us to understand other people on the asexual spectrum more. So it's actually a gift rather than a curse, even though it might feel like a curse because it's quite frustrating when you don't quite fit in anywhere. Like you don't fit into the heteronormative world, you don't fit in exactly to any complete asexual box, and so it can be really hard. I know from personal experience I'm talking, right? Because it's like, oh, why can't I just fit in? But then if we just fit in somewhere when we're born to stand out, we can't do it because we are outstanding. We're born to stand out. We're born to be different, right? And our differences are beauty. So I want you to embrace your differences. If you don't fit into a tight little neat asexual box, see that as a beautiful, nuanced, diverse thing that helps you understand different people a lot better, especially on the asexual spectrum. That's how I see it. But yes, sometimes I do get frustrated that I don't quite fit in exactly anywhere. But then other times I just say, Sandra, you are born like this, you're made like this, so you can help so many asexuals and you can understand lots of different types of people. You get them, you understand different asexuals across the asexual spectrum because you have elements of different asexuals within you, different identities and sub-identities within you. I'm also an asexual cougar, so I like younger guys. I'm really attracted to younger guys in their early to mid-20s, but not sexually. So, I find it hard to find a suitable guy for me because there's a lot of heterosexual guys who like older women, but there appears to be a lack of asexual guys that like older women. But all I have to do is eventually find one asexual guy or a heterosexual guy that's not that bothered about having sex that likes an older girl, right? And all it takes is like one guy. I'm sure there's one guy in the world that thinks, oh my God, I'm asexual, but I like older women, but all the older women want sex and I don't. Right, and that guy's probably looking for me in the world, like a needle in a haystack. Hello, I'm here. He's probably thinking, oh my God, I like older women, but I just don't want sex with them. And all these older women want sex, and it drives me nuts. It makes me angry and frustrated that I can't find a girl of my dreams. And I'm like, here I am, And so we have to remember that if we're struggling with our asexuality and finding the right person for us, that there is someone out there, I'm sure, that is struggling with the exact same problem in the opposite way to what we are. So I'm looking for a younger guy who doesn't want sex with an older woman or older girl, but there's going to be a guy in the world somewhere that's looking for an older woman who doesn't want sex, and he's fed up with all the women that want sex who are older, you know what I mean? So he'll be looking for someone like me, and I'm looking for someone like him, right? But we haven't bumped into each other yet, right? So we have to keep the faith, people. And also, you know, I have grey areas. I have sexual behaviour, the way I like to kiss and dance, but I experience zero sexual attraction. I experience high arousal levels, but zero sexual attraction. So that's how I can understand grey sexuals, because I have grey areas myself, even though I don't experience any sexual attraction whatsoever. So I'm a pure asexual in that way. I still have grey areas. Like, you know what I mean? To the point where I've been snogging a guy, snogging is passionately kissing a guy on the dance floor, and the DJ's gone, "Oh, get a room, you two," because he thinks I want sex because of the way I'm behaving, even though I'm the opposite and definitely don't want sex. So, because I have all these nuances, I'm able to understand grey romantics, those that lack romantic attraction, don't have the full range of romantic attraction, the normal romantic attraction. And then I'm actually defined as a heteromantic, so I understand asexuals who are romantic. And then I'm a hyperromantic, which means excessively romantic, which means that I can relate to heterosexuals, for example, women who get very seduced by charismatic guys, and it's because they experience high sexual attraction chemistry with a guy, but I experience high aesthetic and romantic attraction chemistry with a heterosexual guy. So I can actually relate, even in Love Life Club, for example, to the women who fall for bad guys or guys who aren't good for them because of the chemistry, the physical chemistry. I have physical chemistry with heterosexual guys, but for me, it's high aesthetic attraction and romantic attraction. It's high levels of that, right? So because I have that in me, I can actually relate to heterosexual women who get very chemically attracted, have high chemistry with other heterosexual guys, and then get heavily attached to them. I get heavily attached to some heterosexual guys because I have chemistry with them, even though I'm asexual, because it's romantic and aesthetic chemistry mixing with their sexual chemistry. It's a concoction of chemistry, but just different types, right? And this is very important to know. You know, and I have had sex in the past, so I can understand why some asexuals do have sex. You know, I can understand that some feel good about having it because they like having it with the partner they love. I have, like, the last experience I had of sex was a good experience because the guy did lots of foreplay. He was my last long-term ex, 2011, you know, and loads of kissing, which is what I wanted. He did that in the lead up to sex. Because he was so good at doing that, then my body was like physically aroused to do sex, so it's prepared for it in that way. But sometimes I would just be like, that's enough, I can't do it anymore, or I don't want to go any further, I just want to kiss. But a lot of the time I would have preferred to kiss, and that my mindset was like, oh, I've had my kissing and touching now, he can have his sex type thing. And I wasn't hating on it then. It's just not really, you know, I'd just rather be doing other things. I was not really into it like he was. But I experienced everything. I felt everything. I was good at doing that with him, but he paid a lot more attention to my sexual needs and my body and what I wanted than I did to him, really, because I wasn't really into it. You know what I mean? It's harder work for me. I felt it was harder work doing that type of thing, you know, if you're physically touching a guy down there like this, it hurts your hands and stuff, because I'm not that into sex. Most people probably don't think about their hands hurting and all this lot. I do, because it's like I'm not really into the sex, so I'm noticing my arms hurting, my hands hurting. It's not very practical for me, because asexuals tend to think a lot more practically about sex. I think in general, they tend to think about the downsides of it, and the practicalities. They tend to think about, you know, where to put their arms, where to put their legs, what to do here, what to do there, and all this lot. So it's a lot more complicated for them. Whereas a sexual person will just like, yeah, let's have sex, let's get on with it now. And they don't really think much about it, think twice about it. They just want to get on and do it. Whereas an asexual person will have to think a lot more, because it's not something that comes natural necessarily to a lot of asexuals, and it's something that asexuals will be thinking more about, doing the mechanical side of it, like the actions of it, if you know what I mean. And some asexuals, they're just thinking about a lot of other things. They're not focused on the actual sex. They're thinking, what am I going to eat later? What TV program I'll watch? What artwork am I going to do? And they're thinking about other things in their head because they're not focused on sex. This is how you can tell if you're asexual or not, if these things resonate with you, the things I've said about asexuals and how they feel. And also, it's important to note that everyone's an individual, and there is something called ace flux. So if you're not aware of what ace flux is, it has two meanings. One is where someone fluctuates across the asexual spectrum. So they could go from experiencing no romantic attraction whatsoever, and then they fluctuate to experiencing strong romantic attraction to someone. And they could fluctuate back down to, I just don't feel romantic attraction anymore. Right? That would be a fluctuation across the asexual spectrum, for example. And equally, someone could think, I have no sexual attraction whatsoever, and then all of a sudden they have a sexual attraction, and then it goes again. Right? But there is also another type of ace flux where someone fluctuates between the asexual spectrum and the sexual spectrum, which is harder to understand, because they might be like, I don't experience any sexual attraction. Then all of a sudden, I experience the usual sexual attraction. Then they're back again to experiencing no sexual attraction at all. And they back up to the experiencing, the usual sexual attraction, or it goes into the grey zone. You know what I mean? So it's just constantly fluctuating. It's not like there's a pattern to it as such, right? Maybe the pattern is just the fluctuation. So you have to know that that does exist as well. And even if you don't find out exactly where you fit, just know that you still fit into this world, and you're still an important piece of life. You do belong here. You're not broken, and there is a place for you, and that's to be you. Sometimes we can't be in a specific box of things because we weren't actually born for that. If you're spiritual and you believe God or the universe or some higher power, that higher power wants you to be that different, to accomplish everything you've got to accomplish in your life as unique you. And they've given you these differences and nuances as a gift. And they're saying, run with these gifts. Be who you're born to be. And that's okay. Many asexuals are born asexual but didn't realize it. But there are some people who identify on the asexual spectrum, and then they realize later on that they don't actually identify as asexuals. And there's a lot of people, obviously, that do, like I said, realize that asexual later in life. Asexuality is a recorded 1% of the population. So 1 in every 100 people is likely to be asexual, or somewhere on the asexual spectrum, right? But whether you're asexual, heterosexual, pansexual, bisexual, homosexual, asexual, whatever sexual orientation you are, you're still valid. You still matter. You're still important. And I'm going to end it there. Take care. Subscribe and hit the bell icon. Bye.